What is up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to episode 2 of Faux Football. This is the real podcast about everyone's favorite fake sport, fantasy football. I'm your host, Chu. You can follow me on Twitter at Father Dynasty and check out the website, fatherdynasty.com. That will be my Substack, so the articles, this podcast, and any of my rankings, which are over at Fantasy Pros. There's a link through the website for weekly rankings. I have some Dynasty rankings as well. So anything and everything related to faux football will be over at fatherdynasty.com. So go ahead, subscribe, follow, check all that out. On today's episode, I am recording this on Friday, so the game for the Chiefs and Chargers actually is going on right now. So the Eagles-Cowboys is behind us. We won't be talking too much about that necessarily. But nothing today, on this episode at least, will be related specifically to that Friday game. Everything will be looking ahead for Sunday and Monday for football for week 1. But very excited that we actually have some actionable stuff to go on. We have points actually going onto our teams. So very excited about that. This episode, we're looking to talk about my number ones. These are the people that I have pegged to finish atop their respective positions. 2 of these people actually did play on Thursday, but I promise these are locked in even before the game started. Go ahead and check the rankings over that I have on the website. They were locked in once that game started. Flex and bust out, and that will be me pointing out a couple of flex options as we go into week 1. Hopefully you don't need too deep of a flex option with injuries and that sort of thing, but maybe you do. And this or that, which is, kind of sit start, but some of it's kind of just prediction of who I think is going to do better, both of which could possibly be starting options for you. So getting into my number ones. So this one has changed a little bit throughout the offseason, but some of these have been pretty consistent. So one that I kind of came on to towards the end of the offseason, Jalen Hurts as my QB1. Again, this was all before Thursday's game, so that was only reinforced it. But looking at how he did the past few seasons, the last time he was the quarterback 1 in points per game was in 2022, finished second in 2023, and then quote-unquote fell off to QB6 last year. And again, last year was on the heels of Saquon Barkley having a tremendous rushing season. Hurts was, of course, still getting the tush-push advantage in terms of rushing touchdowns. That still continues. The rule has not changed, so that is still very much in his favor. You do have a healthy A.J. Brown, which is funny to see my notes on that, considering he got a single target for, I believe, 8 yards. And that target was actually in the fourth quarter. But overall, he has tremendous weapons. Even I believe Jahan Dotson might have been the leader for them on Thursday. So overall, I trust the weapons he has. I trust the offense that he's in. I trust his skill set. I think he's a tremendous balance of, again, he's a tremendous threat as a rusher, which is great for fantasy upside. But he really is a great passer and kind of calm, cool, and collect. But when the pocket does break down, he knows how to navigate those lanes and, gain meaningful yards. And, even just chunk gains that ended up with multiple rushing touchdowns. So in 2024, looking at what he did, it was his fewest passing attempts since 2021. But it either matched or made a new career high in passing yards per attempt. So I do think that the element of what Saquon Barkley brings helps take a little bit of the brunt off of him and helps kind of allow him to maximize his passing talents. But if he's still able to do the tush push and get some of those extra rushing touchdowns, I think that'll keep him in the top 5, but I do think there's real quarterback 1 upside there. Jumping over to my RB1, this one, I've been beating this drum all offseason. It's hilarious that I'm recording this now, considering some of the latest news with Christian McCaffrey, who I have as my RB1, has had a healthy offseason. He was the RB1 as recently as 2023. It's not lost on me what happened in 2024, such a bizarre start to the season. Then he was out so much. Then he had to go to, I believe, Germany to get some sort of injections for his Achilles, like tendinopathy type thing, which, of course, concerning, and considering that leading into week 1, he was hit with the questionable tag, and none of us want to see that happen again, reliving that nightmare of last year. But he also spoke on that and had mentioned that I mean, his goal is to play, and I think they're just being precautious or cautious, which I understand. But again, I mean, this is an easy schedule for the 49ers. We saw Brock Purdy did well last season, even while so many of his weapons, and including his offensive line, were going down and getting injured. Going into this season, you have a re-signed George Kittle. You have a second year of Ricky Pearsall, ending the last 2 games of last season very strong. Juwan Jennings just got a little pay bump and should be healthy, I believe. And Brandon Ayuk, I think, will be back probably mid-season. But, I mean, Christian McCaffrey, that's everyone else. They had to bring in Brian Robinson because everybody else that they had brought in as the depth, as Isaac Guerrero, Jordan James, so many other people have gotten hurt. So I think Christian McCaffrey, again, assuming he's healthy and fine, he's a lock for top 5. And I think it's basically, if he's healthy, he's a consistent threat to be the RB1. I understand that's a big if, but it's a volatile position when it comes to injuries, so I'm going to go with the talented guy who's done it before, and I do think still has good football ahead of him on a tremendous high upside offense. Going to the wide receiver 1, CeeDee Lamb. So ironically, of course, two of my number ones are people that actually have already played in the first game of the season. And I know this was, again, decided before that game, so this was before the drops and everything, but it's wild to think how good of a game he had was still marred by the couple of drops that he had at terrible times. One of which was an atrocious drop. I think the final drop that he had, I understand, but if you get your hand on the ball and you're diving for it, I know the rule is you're supposed to catch it. But overall, I think we're seeing the upside of having Dak back and healthy. And, CeeDee Lamb, he did actually finish as the wide receiver 1 back in 2023. Just absurd, 181 targets. I mean, that was a career high for him. And I believe a career high in touchdowns as well. I think it was 12. So, I mean, tremendous season then. And now, I think there's some optimism for they've continued to try and improve this offensive line, which I think is helpful. I know if anything, the Micah Parsons trade to Green Bay, I think, helps in terms of them needing to be passing more and more. And George Pickens, who I think is the best wide receiver 2 that Dallas has had since Amari Cooper was there, he still, especially in that first game, was up to a bit of the same antics. There was the one pass interference call that he ended up getting in his favor. But to be honest, I mean, he sold it. I think he actually could have finished the play, and he was probably 3-4 yards from the end zone. He still could have gotten 2 hands on the ball and fallen into the end zone. Again, he got the penalty in his favor. It worked out fine, so that's not a big deal. But in the sense of like Pickens being Pickens, like it only further supports CeeDee Lamb. Just can get open super consistently. You do still have Jake Ferguson and to work underneath. So CeeDee Lamb has a very, very clear, you get him all over the field and get him the ball. Again, 160 targets I think should be the minimum for him. And if you can get him to double-digit touchdowns, I think we could very well see wide receiver 1 again. And last but not least, this is another one, kind of like Christian McCaffrey. I was pretty set on this going into the offseason and throughout it. Trey McBride is the tight end 1. He was the tight end 8 in 2023, and then last season the tight end 2, behind a stellar rookie season with Brock Bowers. I mean, the Kyler connection is notable. It's pretty obvious. I know the big discussion last season was how late into the year it took for him to actually get his first touchdown, especially considering the target share that he had in that offense. Another thing that's notable, though, is even last season, with it being 2 touchdowns and it being so late into the season, his career high is 3, which he had gotten in the previous season. So, I mean, he's never exceeded 3 touchdowns in any of his, I believe, 3 seasons to this point. So he's going into his 4th year here. And the target volume is apparent. But I think we can just hope, I mean, if he's going to have a similar target share, and if he can at least match the 3 touchdowns, I mean, ideally you got to get it to 4 or 5. I mean, something like that just to help kind of get him over the hump. I think we can really see a tight end 1 here in Trey McBride. And again, I understand Marvin Harrison Jr., he bulked up in the offseason. I don't think that was his problem last year, and I don't think he had a god-awful season. But I do think that there's something there with, I think that Trey McBride at worst is the number 2 target in Arizona. And I think depending on game flow, some of the time he kind of becomes that sure-handed safety blanket for Kyler, which is never a bad thing. So for me, it's looking at this Cardinals team and knowing that it still very much flows through Trey McBride as a pass catcher, and then James Conner, who's another notable player in that offense on the ground. So that does it for my number ones. Again, of course, the recap: QB1 is going to be Jalen Hurts, RB1 Christian McCaffrey, wide receiver 1 CeeDee Lamb, and the tight end 1 Trey McBride. Jumping over to Flex and Bust Out, and that is looking at running backs and wide receivers outside of the top 36 in respective positions, not in total players between those two positions. And that's just ranked based on the Fantasy Pros consensus rankings, just to be able to pick kind of one thing to base it off of. But again, I do have my own separate rankings over on the website, fatherdynasty.com. These are 3 running backs and 3 wide receivers that are outside of that top 36 range that I do think are flex worthy if you need to go that deep for flex players. First one, running back wise, Nick Chubb. He's just outside of that 38 for running backs. They're playing the Rams. At the moment, of course, Joe Mixon is out for at least the first month. And as best I understand, it's Nick Chubb's starting position to lose. I do have mild concern that Dameon Pierce could take away some meaningful touches, but again, I do think that even if Nick Chubb is, a fraction of what he used to be, again, I know he's gone through some injuries as well, but I think he's the steady-handed running back they want to have behind CJ Stroud as they surrounded him with even more pass catchers, because even now with Christian Kirk going down, you still have Jalen Noel that can step up. You have Jaden Higgins on the outside. So again, I know they have a Swiss cheese offensive line, but I think that's all the more reason to have a veteran running back like Nick Chubb to help in protection for CJ Stroud. But yeah, he's a steady veteran. He at least gets the first crack. And I think when you're looking this deep into rankings, if you can possibly get a starter for a running back in the flex position, I think that's always worthwhile. Again, I know the Rams defense was pretty stout, especially with some good drafting last season, but I still think it's worthwhile to give Nick Chubb a shot. Next is Dylan Sampson. He's at RB40 going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. A pretty atrocious defense and not much improvement made since last season. I know that there was they eventually sorted out with what was going on with their defensive line in terms of getting the veteran signed right before the season started and having the early rookie draft pick taking a good while to sign. That was the issue with the guaranteed money and that sort of thing. But that was, of course, not just with the Bengals. That was with a number of other players on different teams. But Dylan Sampson, I know that Jerome Ford currently is the starter. He's, of course, has been there for a couple of years at this point. But with Quinshon Judkins, they're still sorting that stuff out. I do think Dylan Sampson is the more explosive option. And considering that the Bengals are going to presumably obliterate the Browns in terms of just scoring points, I think that Dylan Sampson offers some good upside there, and it's going to be probably a bit of a boomer bust because I think the rushing attack as a whole would be taking a backseat to them trying to get Joe Flacco to push the ball down the field to Judy and Njoku and Tillman and those guys. But, I mean, again, you're getting this far out, and I do think it could be Dylan Sampson is in a very even split with Jerome Ford, and again, even mid-game could overtake him depending on game flow. So I think that this early on, week one, if you need to go to Dylan Sampson this kind of deep into the running back room, then I mean it's an option. And last but not least, Ollie Gordon, running back for the Miami Dolphins, running back 46 on this list, and they're going up against the Colts. Again, an improved defense over the years. He is the RB2 for the moment in Miami, and that is behind Devon Achane, who by all accounts is healthy. Again, I know he was dealing with a little bit of the Q tag, if you will, for the last week or so. But I think was noted to be healthy. He's going to be playing. Again, even if he's not 100%, again, it seems to be good enough to where there's not a tremendous concern that he can't manage most of the workload. But again, it's the thunder and lightning dynamic that so many teams are chasing. And yes, while I have no doubt that Achane is going to be dominating the touches both on the ground and in the air in Miami, I do think that Ollie Gordon has shown a bit of what he can do throughout the preseason, Again, not something I expected seeing him come out of college. But with Jalen Wright on the shelf, I know they brought in some veterans and stuff, but I do think Ollie Gordon, they're comfortable with him, and he could get some meaningful touches. Again, it's the power element, but it's a very clear two. It's not a 1A, 1B. I think he's the clear two to Achane. But he does offer a different skill set, so, he could vulture a touchdown, and that's kind of all he can hope for at this point. One notable one, which I'm not adding him on this list, but I understand there was all the hubbub about Christian McCaffrey, which I mentioned before about him being questionable or is he on the shelf or whatever. I understand the want to have and or stash Brian Robinson Jr. with the injury history of Christian McCaffrey. I know that's a notable one. So, again, that's more of a stash and just a note for anyone who wants to do that. Because if anything, you could have him, and when this kind of stuff comes up with Christian McCaffrey, if you're comfortable with him, you could, if anything, trade him, because I guarantee you're going to get people to buy into the Christian McCaffrey is always hurt narrative. Going over to wide receiver, these are the three I've got here. Deebo Samuel is the first one, wide receiver 38. They are going up against the Giants. By all accounts, had a pretty strong camp, which I think was good. I know some of the weird stuff of making it seem like he looked overweight through camp. I mean, he's a thick dude. He's built like, I would say a running back, but I almost want to say, the safety. He's built. He is someone who, again, can take touches out of the backfield. I think it's going to be interesting to see how he's used in the Cliff Kingsbury offense. Again, Terry McLaurin is back. I understand that him dealing with the contract throughout the offseason, so who's to say how that's really going to end up, considering that he wasn't signed and just, no interruption throughout the offseason. But I'm not concerned about McLaurin's connection with Jaden Daniels. Deebo Samuel, again, got the entire offseason to work with him. By all accounts, he's healthy, so I really have confidence in Deebo being able to step in and be a very intriguing flex option for anyone in need. Second, going to Matthew Golden, a wide receiver for the Packers. They're going up against the division rival Lions. And this is an exciting one. Again, the Lions, towards the end of last season, just their defense was just crumbling with injuries. But as far as I know, Lions, healthy on defense. Always an exciting time when you can get week one and it be a divisional matchup. And again, two good teams. So not just divisional matchup just for the sake of a divisional matchup, two very good teams. And I am most optimistic, I'll just kind of say it off the rip, for Tucker Kraft, tight end for the Packers, as the most high upside pass catcher, most optimistic pass catcher for me on the Packers. But Matthew Golden has grown on me. A number of people in the know have, spoken highly of him, spoken highly of how he's gone through camp and everything. Do I blindly believe that he can be the de facto wide receiver one? I still don't think that. But I do think that with what was going on with Christian Watson, just consistently injured, I do think Reed still injured as far as I understand. I don't think he's going to play week one. But the other guys, Wicks, Dobbs, Dobbs I do think is going to have a reasonable role, but still fairly ancillary. And I do think Matthew Golden offers a bit of a different skill set. He's had all this offseason. I know he's a rookie, so you can't really guarantee anything necessarily. But much like I said with the running backs, with Chubb and them, if you're able to get what is presumed to be the wide receiver one this late to be able to flex, I think in the flex you can either go for that safe, just volume based on a PPR standpoint, or you can go for the upside of, it's conceivably the number one on wide receiver in an offense. And I think there's enough upside there to go ahead and chase that. And speaking of, I guess we'll call it a safety blanket, there's not a great floor for this guy, but he's someone who I think has just had enough random weeks where he does kind of well that I think it's worth throwing into the mix here. And that's Rashad Bateman, the wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens, wide receiver 52 as a Fantasy Pros rankings, and they're going against the Buffalo Bills. So he's a trusted target. He was brought back, and I don't love really a lot of the pass catchers in the Ravens offense, kind of just because, Lamar's going to do well. And again, both as a passer and a rusher. But I think on any given week, you have Rashad Bateman, you have DeAndre Hopkins. You already had Zay Flowers there. Likely, I think we'll be missing week one, but Andrews will be there, and I guess Andrews will no longer be dropping the ball as the season ended last year. But Rashad Bateman had a couple of weeks, get a couple of touchdowns here and there. I do think he had a tough start to his career of just injuries and inconsistencies, but I think he's kind of getting his feet under him. And again, I don't think he's going to become the number one target in Baltimore by any means. But I do think when you're getting this deep into needing a flex in this list, I think he's an interesting kind of touchdown dependent player that probably you won't need in week one, but he's the kind of player that once you get a couple of weeks into the season, bye weeks start to pick up, injuries mount, it's just kind of a weird week. He may be one of those guys that you may have to take a look at. So a name that I think is worth noting now and that could be utilized in the future. And next up is This or That. This is looking at two closely ranked players for week one, either consecutively ranked or within like 2 or 3 spots of one another. And this is, of course, all based on Fantasy Pros consensus rankings. Just a way to pick kind of a consensus thing independent of myself to kind of go off of and kind of work with. Again, check out my rankings, weekly, dynasty, what have you, over at fatherdynasty.com, and there's a rankings tab there, so check that out. But for these, I've got 2 at each position, two kind of pairings and matchups, so to speak. The first one at quarterback, I've got Brock Purdy going against the Seahawks and Justin Fields going up against his former team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last season, I think Purdy put on a clinic considering what he did for fantasy despite all of the injuries and such around him. Again, I already told you about my optimism with Christian McCaffrey. I do believe in the upside of Ricky Pearsall. Loved him coming out of college, and I do think that, a full healthy offseason, by all accounts, I do think he can take a step forward. George Kittle, I know I mentioned Trey McBride. I think Kittle has tremendous upside to be in that top 3 for the tight ends, no matter what. Justin Fields, a bit concerning, just recently within the last week or so, losing his starting left tackle. They'll shuffle it around, they'll be okay, but the main receiver is, of course, his college teammate in Garrett Wilson, but after that, it's, the Josh Reynolds, the Allen Lazard. It's rough. And you do have rookie tight end Mason Taylor. You do have a very good backfield in Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, and Isaiah Davis, so that's a good thing to have, but I do think that I think he got the contract that he did for a reason. He is a bridge. Again, if it worked out, he could certainly be re-signed for longer, but when I'm looking at how these players are going to start, I have much more confidence in week one in Brock Purdy going against the Seahawks than I do Fields against what is the, if not top 3 defenses in the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I'm pretty comfortably going with Purdy and the 49ers overall from a fantasy standpoint. And the second quarterback pairing, we've got Bryce Young going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and then Caleb Williams going up against the Minnesota Vikings. So call me a homer. Again, I am a Panthers fan, but I'm going young on this one. I understand that Adam Thielen is gone. I'm not a big believer in Xavier Legette, and yes, Jalen Coker did just go down. But look at who his options were last season. There was a meaningful amount of David Moore, if that says anything. I think there has been the left tackle Ike Ekwonu. He had appendicitis. I had that, so I can only imagine having to be an offensive lineman and trying to play a week later after that happened. Crazy. But I do believe Ike Ekwonu would be out, and I do think there was Damian Lewis or another lineman that I think should still play, but that has been a strength for them after they made a big investment in that 2 years back. So hopeful that enough of them are healthy, and thankfully they have a little bit of depth with Brady Christensen and some of those guys. But Caleb Williams, again, he's got the offensive head coach that everyone wanted at Ben Johnson. He's got some more weapons, and already having DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, you got Luther Burden, you got Colson Loveland. You got a so-so backfield, nothing super notable there, but I'm really at this point just picking between matchup. I do think how Bryce Young finished this season, I don't think he's going to keep that up necessarily, but I do think that he can keep up a level of that, and especially if he's going up against the Jaguars defense, I have much more confidence that, how he's gone throughout the offseason and everything, much of it is a confidence thing, it seems. And I think he's really carried that from last season, the confidence at least, into this season. And I'm hopeful that his connection with Tetairoa McMillan, again, if Leggett can do any bit of anything, fantastic. Hunter Renfrow, again, I think can be a very capable working underneath in the slot kind of guy. And I guess I think a very underrated tandem in the backfield in Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle. And Jatavian Sanders, a tight end. I think he's someone who could flash at tight end as well. But yeah, I'm going Bryce Young on that one.
So next is going to the running back position, and we are starting out with a tough matchup with Tony Pollard going up against the Denver Broncos, and TreVeyon Henderson, the rookie, going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. So for me, I'm still a bit leery on Henderson, not in the fact of him not having high upside as an explosive runner. He's a pass catcher. I understand all of that, but he is in a split backfield. I'm curious to see how split it will be, because it does seem like there still is going to be a bit of an emphasis on the power game with Ramondre Stevenson. They do have a pretty rough offensive line. I think possibly missing Will Campbell, their recent first-round pick as well, and that the offensive line was already a bit questionable before that. So very concerned there. But Pollard, going back to the Titans, I understand the concern there with the Titans have improved the offensive line, but still not fantastic. It's a rookie quarterback, and they are going up against a stingy defense in the Denver Broncos. But I do think that, again, Tony Pollard is the running back to own in that backfield in Tennessee, and that's even if Tyjae Spears was healthy. He is not. So I think Pollard will be peppered with a lot of the work, and I do think with the rookie quarterback mindset, possibly be getting some dump-offs and being able to turn those into chunk plays. So I think there's going to maybe not be quite enough volume for Henderson to make his impact, or if he does, it will be spotty, almost in like a Xavier Worthy as a receiver for the Chiefs. Had some big weeks, but again, kind of disappeared a lot of the time. I think Henderson could have some big weeks, but a lot of the time not disappear, but just have a much more average and modest impact. So going Pollard there. Second running back matchup, we got Tyrone Tracy going up against the Commanders, and Jaylen Warren, the newly re-signed Jaylen Warren, going up against the New York Jets. I've been banging this drum all offseason. Tyrone Tracy has been, I feel like people just forget about the first half of the season even for Tracy, or anything before those fumbles. Which, understandably, I mean, if you're a Giants fan and you remember the fumbling problems of, say, Tiki Barber and that kind of stuff, I get it. There are some concerns there, but he's a rookie. He's a converted running back from wide receiver from college. Again, he's got that great build of, again, a bigger running back, but again, is capable as a pass catcher. I think he's the lightning to Cam Scadabo's thunder. And Scadabo, again, had a little bit of injury in the offseason, but whether it's Scadabo or Singletary being the second back, it's very much they have different skill sets. Tyrone Tracy is the more explosive option, I think, is the 1A at worst in this offense. With Warren, I don't know what to make of that backfield. I was not tremendously high on Caleb Johnson, but I do think considering his draft capital and his landing spot, I don't think it could have gotten much better for him necessarily in terms of a place that he has a sincere opportunity. But again, aside from Warren being the veteran there, no offense to Kenneth Gainwell, but I mean, Warren having been there the entirety of his career, I just don't know what to make of that. I just have much more faith in Tracy's upside and his role, and the going up against the Commanders' defense, I also trust that much, much more. So going over to wide receiver, we've got the first matchup, Emeka Egbuka going up against the Falcons, and Jamison Williams going up against the Packers. And call me crazy, but I'm going to go Egbuka on this one. Maybe it's not that crazy because the hype train has just gone off the rails for Egbuka going into this offseason. It's understood, Chris Godwin on the shelf for the first, month or so, dealing with his pretty gruesome injury last season. And Mike Evans still there and still the very dominant perennial 1,000-yard receiver and offers a different skill set from Egbuka, but I think there's plenty to go around. I do believe that Baker Mayfield is going to be either could be the leader in passing yards this season or at worst top 5. It's going to be a very pass-heavy offense. And Jameson Williams, it's not to say that he won't have a role. I do think he's actually going to maybe even take a step forward from last season. But there is, some uncertainty with what the offense is going to look like with Ben Johnson gone. He does have that big play upside, but I do think the Packers defense, while getting better with Micah Parsons, I think is good as a whole. And I do think that you're really just rolling the dice on I trust Igbuka and what we believe his target volume to be versus Jameson Williams' perceived upside considering his, ability to take the top off of defense. So the second wide receiver grouping, Calvin Ridley going up against the Broncos, as I mentioned, Tony Pollard earlier, and also Travis Hunter going up against the Carolina Panthers. So this one is a risky one in terms of I'm picking the wide receiver 2 here, but I'm going Travis Hunter, and that's, going against my Carolina Panthers. As far as we know, it seems like much of the role for Travis Hunter is leading towards you're a wide receiver, ... and then maybe kind of a cornerback. And I think that's smart. I think at a certain point, it's like start with one. There's been a number of players that maybe have had, like Champ Bailey, I know is the most notable one. But guys that have played both ways in college well. But at a certain point, I think he could still do that, but I think make his biggest impact as a wide receiver. And I think the Panthers, while they've been working hard to improve what was a historically bad defense last season, again, the defensive line has been helped. I'm a little concerned about the linebackers, and outside of J.C. Horn, I do think there's a bit of concern on the back end of the defense. And I think maybe with Liam Cohen going there to Jacksonville, I think Travis Hunter will be used in tremendously creative ways on offense. I think that's going to be huge for him and his ability to produce as a fantasy player. And Calvin Ridley going up against the Denver Broncos, having one of the toughest matchups, if not the toughest matchups, with Patrick Surtain as the DB across from him, presumably. I think Ridley will have a good season this year, another 1,000-yard season, what have you, but again, this matchup specifically, it just has me concerned. And last but not least, the tight ends. The first one, we've got Tucker Kraft going up against the Lions and Tyler Warren going up against the Dolphins. So for me, I've been beating the Tucker Kraft drum all off season. He's my favorite of the Green Bay Packers pass catchers. He's had a great season last year. I think it was 4 or 5 tight end one, top 12 finishes, 2 of which were consecutive weeks as the tight end one. He is just a tremendous athlete at a position that it is encouraged to be that, on top of actually sincerely being a very capable pass catcher. And I think that's exactly what they're going to need going up against that Lions defense. I'm also tremendously excited about Tyler Warren. Loved him coming out of college, and it's interesting the situation that he's in going to the Colts as they eventually settled on Daniel Jones being their quarterback. But I do think that Tyler Warren could very possibly be used in creative ways, maybe not quite to the degree he was in college at Penn State, but, could have some runs here or there and could just be peppered with the ball underneath to be able to work it upfield. So, again, that could be a close one, but I'm going to lean Kraft on that. And last but not least, Zach Ertz going up against the New York Giants, and Dalton Kincaid going up against the Baltimore Ravens. So I've already talked about Deebo Samuel and the other targets there for Washington, but Zach Ertz, a tried and true pass catcher for Jaden Daniels, coming into his second season. Again, Ertz was, all but left for dead as far as a player and a fantasy asset necessarily. And Cliff Kingsbury brings him in, familiarity with him, and just does great work. I'm ultimately expecting a touchdown out of Zach Ertz in the first week, and like his weekly upside of that possibly happening. And I was not really as high on Dalton Kincaid, even coming out of college, and I know a lot of people were, and then are kind of holding on to that, waiting for that breakout to happen. I'm not saying it can't or won't happen. I think we've been spoiled by so many tight ends hitting immediately that we forget that the previous thought was give him a couple of years and then it'll happen. But for Kincaid, he came into what I thought was a very good situation in them needing that pass catcher for Josh Allen. And it just hadn't really quite stuck yet. Not saying it can't happen this season, but I think we're starting week 1. Kincaid's going up against a very difficult defense with the Baltimore Ravens. Ertz going up against the Giants, who I think have one of the, if not the best defensive lines in football, but otherwise not a tremendously strong defense. So I do think Zach Ertz can, as Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel are working out around him, he can get open. And I think as the Commanders are pushing the ball down the field, Zach Ertz can be a red zone threat and get himself a touchdown. But yes, with all that being said, that is it for this week's episode. And before I officially end it, I do want to give a shout out to all of those fantasy football managers out there. You are undefeated as of right now. Hopefully you have Javonte Williams and you started him. And hopefully you did not start A.J. Brown. You probably did start him, and you probably didn't start Javonte Williams. But unfortunately, that's fantasy football, and that is why we are all usually furious by the end of the first week. But thank you again for tuning in, and be sure to like, subscribe, follow, whatever you can, the Faux Football Substack and podcast, both of which can be found at fatherdynasty.com. But, of course, the podcast, if you would rather listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, that sort of thing, it is available. And last but not least, the rankings that I do are over at fatherdynasty.com. There's a tab that says rankings, takes you right to them. And if you have any thoughts on this episode or just, sincere disagreements, let me know about them on Twitter at fatherdynasty. And have a good week 1.